And now we will turn the tables, and Williamson will question Dr. Craig. You have 7 minutes.
Dr. Craig, Dr. Horner and I got into this on Monday, and it's still puzzling me. This idea of objective morality coming out of God and some kind of connection. Now, Dr. Horner, I don't recall if he used this expression, but Dr. Horner had used the expression real values, real objectivity. Now, I guess I'm just wondering, what's the difference between real objectivity and ordinary objectivity?
Well, I don't use that expression.
Okay.
I would just say objective moral values. And what I'm distinguishing there would be moral values that are independent of whether anybody believes in them or not. So, for example, even if everybody thought that the Holocaust was good, to say that it's objectively evil means that we can imagine the Nazis winning World War II. Everybody thinks it was good, but it was really an evil thing that happens. That's what I mean by objective values, as opposed to just subjective values, which is what I think you described, where we all have morals that guide our lives, and these are just, on atheism, I think, subjective.
Now, I actually was appealing essentially to your second premise, because you seem to believe that there are objective values. Now, I think my mind wandered, but I didn't hear what your justification for that second premise was.
It was basically moral experience. I think that in moral experience we apprehend such a realm, George. I had a debate with the atheist Louise Anthony at UMass in Amherst, and I think she put it so well. She said, any argument for moral skepticism will be based upon premises which are less obvious than the existence of objective moral values and duties themselves. And therefore, she said she could never be convinced of moral nihilism. It's clear that there are objective moral values and duties because they're more obvious than the key premises in an argument for skepticism.
Okay, but if we simply intuit these things, if we simply detect them by some power of our minds, what's the need to bring in God into this? Because it seems to me if human beings are doing the job in the first place, then, well, I don't know why God is necessary.
Here, I think it is absolutely critical that we distinguish between moral ontology and moral epistemology.
Mm-hmm.
Moral ontology attempts to provide a foundation in reality for the values and duties that we have. Moral epistemology asks the question, how do we come to know our duties and our values? And I'm not suggesting that we need God in order to do moral epistemology. That's not my argument. My argument is that God serves in the area of moral ontology to ground moral values in his nature and character and moral duties in his commandments.
Okay. So the objectivity you're talking about in this argument is, effectively you're suggesting that there's an existence objectively of moral facts or something of that nature?
Well, not in a Platonic sense, if you mean the sort of Platonic reality, but I think that it's to affirm moral realism, yes, that there are moral truths, and many of them, I think, are as necessarily true as the truths of mathematics and logic. Remember the quote from Michael Roos about raping a little child being like 2 + 2 = 5. He equates there this moral truth with a proposition of mathematics.
Okay. Now, I guess I'm still wondering about this problem of knowing our ethics. Because Dr. Horner thought I was confusing the two issues between metaphysical objectivity or ontology and epistemological objectivity. But the puzzle for me is, suppose there is objective moral facts out there somewhere in the cosmos written down in stone. If human beings have no way of knowing those, then it doesn't do us any good.
No,
we need some objective, epistemologically objective access to those facts. Now, it seems to me that turns around being able to give and take reasons. We need something out there in the public that's accessible to all of us, and we need to give and take reasons about that. So how would you connect the existence of moral facts to our knowledge of them?
Well, I think if anything, the theist would enjoy an advantage here. He could say that God has equipped us with cognitive capacities to recognize the moral values and duties that there are. But I'm quite willing to work here with my secular moral colleagues in developing a theory of moral epistemology, how we come to know the good and the ought. If anything, the theist has an advantage in that he could also appeal to the resources of divine revelation for areas, say, of moral ambiguity. But I'm open to any sort of moral theories about how we come to know the content of the good and our duties.
Okay, but here's the puzzle for me. If we are intuiting these things, then it seems to me either the intuition is epistemologically adequate to our knowledge or it's not. And if it's not, then, well, we don't have the knowledge. If it is epistemologically adequate, then it seems to me it's going to have to be based in some objectivity that we can actually scrutinize. We're going to need to be able to find out the reasons for it. But the trouble is, if we are able to find out the reasons for why something is right and wrong, then it again seems like God is superfluous.
Well, I don't think we will find out the reasons why something is right and wrong, independent of God ultimately. You can find certainly subordinate reasons. For example, it's wrong to rape a child because it does harm to that child. It injures her. But then that just raises the further question, well, why is it wrong to cause injury or harm to someone? After all, this goes on all the time in the animal kingdom. Well, eventually you've got to come to some explanatory stopping point, unless you're a moral nihilist. And I think that the most adequate explanatory stopping point would be found in God, His nature, and commandments.
Well, I'd have to disagree there. You described harm as a subordinate reason. Now, this is something I find disturbing about the theist position, because essentially you're saying that without God's say-so, harm wouldn't be an adequate reason. So in other words, you wouldn't accept harm as an adequate reason, and I would.
Great. Thank you, gentlemen. Now, we will give each debater 6 minutes for his closing arguments. So in terms of Aristotle's view of argumentation, we've seen ethos, we've seen logos, now we'll hear some pathos.